Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claris Community Live. I'm thrilled to have Chris Ippolite, a longtime friend and colleague, with me today, and we're going to talk about AI prompting basics. So to get started, we've got a poll that you can open up in the sidebar on WebEx, just with a question about what's your comfort with AI prompting. And I just wanted to introduce Chris. Fun fact, you may know Chris is a Packer fan, but I am also from Wisconsin and near Green Bay, so I had to bring my foam
That
cheese today.
that is the most screenshotted moment of the webinar that you just presented to everybody.
And I just also wanted to share, like, my first memory of Chris is from DevCon. I don't even know how many years ago, but it was the 7-on-7 application when Chris came on stage in a number 4 Brett Favre jersey.
Yep.
And there was a crazy woman in the audience who stood up and started screaming, and that was me.
Who was that? Yeah. Remember that well. Yeah, let's just pretend it was not like 20 years ago or something like that. But great to be here with you, Rosemary. I'm excited to chat with you, my good friend, and chat about this topic, which I'm fascinated with and look forward to digging into a little bit further with everybody.
Yeah, so I'm just watching the poll come in. We've got a couple seconds left, but a very, very small fraction of the audience is very confident with AI prompting basics. And I definitely put myself in the not at all confident
Well,
category.
everyone's in the right spot. Where the goal of today is really just get really down to the basic level, like super simple, easy prompting principles. I'm going to really start off our discussion in a little bit here with going through what I think are some important prompting guidelines, or I call them the prompting principles. We will also share some links for folks afterwards. We'll talk about that at the end, about places where they can go to take some free online prompting classes, which will be consistent with a lot of the messaging here. And I even put together like a little prompting guidelines that has about, I don't know, 30 or so prompting tips and some examples of what those might look like. But more importantly, we're going to talk to people about what prompting is, and then, not to get you nervous, but then you're going to do some prompting and live prompting in front of everybody to end our session together. And of course,
Which will be kind of interesting, I'm sure.
yeah. And of course, we invite people to ask questions because we want this to be light on lecture and heavy on discussion. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on the chat as well too. And
Yeah.
thank you for the Go Pack Go.
Yes. So yeah, please just pop questions into chat. I think Chris is going to share his slides and just kind of talk through some principles, and then we'll do some Q&A after that, and then get into the exercises.
Yep.
One other note, and of course I can't see it because I'm in the host view, but there should somewhere in the WebEx panel be a place for you to download resources. Chris has kindly shared a whole bunch of resources with you that you are free to download and use to advance your own prompting learning.
Including the PDF of these slides and also a text document of the exercises that you'll be doing so that folks can open up their favorite chat bot window and play along with the exercises. So if you guys want to take a few minutes to do that while I'm going through this first part, you'll be ready to live prompt along with Rosemary. So yeah, so Rosemary, I wanted to really kind of touch on a couple of like thoughts before I get into the prompt principles very quickly. So first of all, prompting, and in the context that we're going to be covering it here today, we're going to be prompting a chatbot, right? There's a bunch of different chatbots. You can use your favorite one for this exercise. But really, the principles that we're going to be talking about apply just as much to sending API calls. And that is really how AI is going to be integrated into FileMaker applications. So for those that are not familiar with AI, but are familiar with FileMaker, if you know how to do an API call, you know how to integrate AI into your solution. And that may get even easier than how you know how to do API calls in the past. So prompting is either typing into a chatbot, the asking the question part and getting a result back, or it's putting some information along with some data into an API call in FileMaker and sending that off to a cloud-based or open source model and getting a response back. So either way, what you're doing is prompting. That makes sense, Rosemary? I think you get the idea on that one, right? So all these tips and techniques or these principles that I'm going to start off with apply to both prompting within a chatbot and then also creating API calls when you're integrating these things with AI models. So if you haven't played at all with AI, this is a great place to be. This is a great start. That we're going to give you some tips on how to get started, and you should definitely get comfortable with prompting inside the chatbot environment. That's probably the best way to do this. So first of all, let me start off by saying, and I'm just going to take about 10 minutes to give a little primer here, and then we'll open things up for questions before we get into the exercise. But let me reel all the way back and say, what is prompting in the first place? Well, large language models, that's what the AI, that's when we talk about AI, we're talking about large language models. These are things like GPT 4o, which is the model that's actually used by ChatGPT. They're all driven by user prompts. In order to get the most out of these chatbots, like ChatGPT, for example, and others, you'll need to understand prompts and the concept of completion. That's really what we're doing when we're prompting. So imagine a large language model as a highly advanced text predictor. That's really what they are. It's like the type ahead features that you see in email programs, like that you're seeing here on screen, but far more sophisticated than that. Large language models are trained on an enormous amount of human written text, like books or articles or websites. And through the training process, they actually learn patterns and grammar and the style of human language. The key there is that they're learning these things. They're not recording, storing, and then representing or sending back the data. They're learning from this information. And they essentially develop a deep statistical understanding of how words and phrases are typically strung together. So it's not so much that they're learning the information so much as they are the structure of how this information works. So when you're giving a large language model a prompt, like a question or the start of a sentence, for example, it uses its knowledge of language patterns to predict and generate the most probable completion or response. So it's not just guessing randomly, or it's not even really answering a question. It's just completing. The answer is actually the completion of the question that you're asking. So it's not guessing, but it's making informed completion predictions based on the vast amount of text that it was trained on. So let me show you another example. So this is a OpenAI playground, and I'm just going to simply put in, just to kind of drive this idea of completion home, I'm just going to type in simply, I think, comma, therefore, and then I'm going to let the language model do the rest. And you'll see here that it returns, I am, and even Rene Descartes with high probability, that's what you'll likely get if you do the same thing. Now, the actual completion you see may be slightly different because the model is non-deterministic by default. And that means that you might get a slightly different completion every time you call it, or even if the prompt remains the same. And it also depends on the context of the conversation where you're prompting. So the point of all this is that as the prompter, you guys, your job is to craft the input text or the prompt in a way that guides the model towards the kind of completion or output that you're looking for. So just think of it, you're starting momentum towards what you want the output to be. So the clearer and more specific your prompt, the more likely you're going to get a satisfactory result from the language model. So these models can do everything from generating stories about the Green Bay Packers to performing complex text analysis. And because they can do so many things, you, the prompter, have to be explicit in describing what it is that you want. So it's not that they're getting the answer wrong. It's that they have so many answers that they might not give you the right one. So our job with prompting is to guide it towards completion and getting the right answer that we want. And this process is called prompt engineering, which you may have heard of before. So in order to kind of get you guys primed and ready, I'm just going to go through a couple, a very small handful of what I think are really important prompting principles, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A, and we'll have a discussion, and we'll do some of these exercises together. So without further ado, let me get to the first one. The first prompting principle is keep your prompts clear and concise. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you that the prompt clearly states the task or question that you want the language model to answer, or the text that you want it to generate. You'll want to avoid using overly complex language and avoid providing too much background information. Now, what you're seeing on screen is a non-concise prompt. So this is the kind of a prompt that would not be a good one to send over there. And let's take a look at why it is. Well, first of all, this prompt is overly wordy and it includes unnecessary details. All that's going to do is confuse the language model and maybe not give you the right answer. And if you think about it from a completion standpoint, it's just giving it information, like red herring information, that's not going to be useful to the output. So you don't want to include that if you don't have to. So while it does do a couple of good things that we'll talk about in later techniques, it does give context about, in this case, the developer services and the target audience that they want to speak to. It's not represented in a clear, actionable format to the language model. So as a result, the model might generate a response that's not focused or actionable. So this is how I would change this prompt into a more concise and effective prompt. This is the same instruction, but you'll notice that the format's a little bit different. So in this second one, I want to point out a couple of things. It's concise, well organized, and it makes it easier for the language model to generate focused and relevant responses. And here's why. It clearly states the type of the content that we're looking for. That's the blog post. And the goal, which is promoting custom software services. It also specifies the target audience. And this is a big deal towards getting what you want. In this case, the target audience is small to medium-sized business owners and decision makers. And then also it breaks down specific elements that are needed, the value propositions that you see, the titles or headlines, and examples that address the customer concerns. And I'll get to this little bullet point thing here as well too, because there are some formatting tips that help you get the right responses from the language model. So by formatting the key items as the list that you see there in the bullet point, the prompt makes it easier for the language model to understand and address each component separately. I know that might sound a little crazy, but it does matter when we break those down. And I'll give you some more explicit examples here in a second. So these little tweaks increase the likelihood of receiving a well-structured and persuasive blog post that effectively promotes your services. So, okay. You might have noticed in that previous one, I also defined the audience. Well, that's another prompting principle. Always clearly define your audience. Now, many prompters, or you may have watched some videos or even heard or seen some of the stuff yourself, you may see people saying in their prompts, you are a helpful assistant, where they're talking to the chat bot and they're saying you're a helpful assistant. Well, first of all, they're not programmed to be unhelpful non-assistants, so it's really not that important of a task. What you really want to do, instead of saying you are a helpful assistant, you're essentially telling the language model what it is, rather than providing information about the intended audience for the output. Instead of focusing on the model's role, it's much more productive to clearly define the target audience for the output. So like, for example, in this case, I'm saying targeted at small business owners who are interested in streamlining their operations with custom software solutions. And then I go on to say my prompt. So I'm not saying you are a helpful assistant. I'm saying who my audience is for the blog post output that I'm looking for. This helps the model tailor its response to specific needs, interests, and background of the intended readers. So for example, instead of saying you're a helpful assistant, more effective one would be this one that you see here. So by immediately specifying the audience, the small business owners, and their key interest, streamlining their custom software solutions, the prompt gives the language model clear context for generating the relevant content. So when you define the audience up front, the model can adjust its language, likely knowledge level, professional concerns, and even the communication style to your audience. So just as a quick pro tip, this whole idea of defining who the audience is in some of the AI for business application deployments that we do, we call this audience personas. And sometimes instead of being a sentence, these can be multiple pages of a document that we're putting inside of a prompt to really specifically fine tune who the audience is and all the information that we need the language model to know so that the output is just perfectly tuned for that audience. So just to give you an idea, at the very least, a couple sentences is probably a good tip. All right, now moving quickly through the rest of these principles. The other one is define your goals. This is kind of a big one. So defining your own goal. So we talked about who the audience is. Now we're going to talk about who you are as the prompter and what you're trying to get out of the response. So by defining your own role and goals, it's just as important as specifying that target audience. This context will give the language model a clear understanding of your perspective, objectives, and the purpose behind the task at hand. So for instance, consider these two prompts. These are two different prompts. So the first one, well, actually, let's focus on the second one. The second one provides a wealth of additional context that can guide the language model's output. So, for example, if we state your role as an independent custom software developer specializing in small business solutions, you indicate the professional context and your area of expertise. This helps the model generate content that aligns with your unique perspective and knowledge. Now, specifying your goal, that's the part where it says here, create a blog post that showcases the benefits of custom software for small businesses, gives the model clear direction and purpose. Now, it understands that the output should be informative, persuasive, and focused to the key advantages of your tailor-made solutions. So the other thing I'll point out here is by mentioning the commitment to delivering high-quality, reliable applications, you signal to the model that the blog post that you're asking it to write should convey a sense of trust and professionalism. And then finally, identifying the target audience, like we talked about in the previous one, the small business owners, helps the model tailor its responses to their specific needs as well, too. So another little pro tip is I'll say, in some of the bigger deployments, we'll often include references to things like brand voice guidelines or marketing objectives or even legal guidelines that we will then provide behind the scenes as part of a prompt to be able to guide the output to be appropriate to our audience and also consistent with our goals as a user or as an organization's goals. Okay, a couple more here. This one might sound like we are anthropomorphizing the model by giving it time to think. And I don't want to get into, spooky, oh my God, it's coming alive type stuff. But really what we're doing here is providing a step-by-step approach. This is what I mentioned earlier in the bullet points. And this is a very common technique that actually, in my own personal experience, I can tell you this has dramatically influence the effectiveness of my prompts and corresponding outputs. So what you're really doing is taking time to break down the what you want the model to do into steps to demonstrate how to guide the model's thinking process. The order of operations is useful. You separating different things out helps it not look at it all as one big task and instead look at as many different tasks. And so by breaking these into specific steps, you guide the model, the language model, to analyze, in this case, the meeting transcript, extract relevant details, and then present the output in a way that aligns the developer's needs. And sometimes these are dependent on previous steps. So you want to give it the instructions on how to actually do it. So for example, if we kind of go in between the lines here, if you look at step number 1, this step here, I'm telling it this information will help the model focus on the most important aspects of the discussion that we're feeding it and structure and give it a structure for the summary. The second one here ensures that the summary that we're asking for captures the essential information and outcomes of the meeting. Now, this third one helps the client understand what tasks have been assigned and when they can expect them to be completed. That's what we're asking it to do there. And then the fourth one, this will help the client who's going to read this summary of activities understand any deviations from the original plan, project plan, and so on. And then finally, this last one here is where that initiates the action that we want the model to perform. Draft a short paragraph that incorporates the key elements in a clear and organized manner. So the takeaway here is providing step-by-step approach. You can effectively guide the language model to generate a comprehensive and relevant summary of, in this case, an internal development meeting, ultimately enhancing communication and transparency with your client. So that's really how you get the best use out of these. I'm going to skip through these steps. We can talk about those a little bit, but they're in the PDF that you received of the session in case you want to look at them later, but we can talk to them a little bit. And just moving forward, just to close out the prompting principles, this is another big one. I'm going to expand on the provide examples a little bit because this is a real, true, effective prompting concept, is providing specific examples. I've showed you bullet point versions and a numbered version, and now I'm going to expound upon that a little bit here. And this technique is often referred to as few-shot prompting, where you offer the model specific examples or scenarios to help guide its understanding or response. Now, this method I find to be particularly effective when you're aiming for things like a certain style or tone or content format in the model's output. So the examples are traditionally provided at the end of your prompt. Since your entire prompt is setting up the completion, remember this is all about completion, so that it will actually be able to use these examples as a pattern, and it will essentially continue the pattern that you've established with your examples. It's not really reading so much the content of your few shot examples. That was sort of early prompting techniques in the GPT-2 and GPT-3 era, you had to like train it with these prompts. But this nowadays, with the way that these models work, you're really just providing it examples of potential tone, format, or style. So it's a little bit different than it used to be, in case you're familiar with the early versions. So here's the key though. What we're doing is we're providing direct examples. If your goal is to create, for example, compelling product descriptions, then provide a couple of examples of existing product descriptions that embody the desired style, tone, and structure. And what I like to do is go find the best human-generated outputs and use those as examples, because then the language model has the perfect guidance to be able to achieve what you're looking for. Where you basically take the guesswork out of it for the language model and just tell it what the kind of thing is that you're looking for. And again, if you're showing examples at the end, then the task is to generate, if let's say you're doing like a product slogan or something, you'll introduce a few successful product slogans to essentially capture that essence of what you want the model to be able to do. Now, the big thing is, this is kind of a pro tip I stumbled across by myself, and it's been so effective. So you'll provide the examples, create a how to create a new invoice, step one, do this, da da da. But at the end, do you see where I put why it works? So I'm explaining to the language model, hey, here's an example of the output I'm looking for. You know, put it with a number one, and then a step one and a step two, and this is where the screenshot would go, and then put a little troubleshooting thing at the end. Like, I'm literally telling you, that's the format I want you to follow in your output. But then I put a little thing at the bottom and I say, well, this is why this works. I'm talking to the model in this case. This help topic provides clear step-by-step instructions on how to create a new invoice. It makes it easier for the user to follow along, and the inclusion of the screenshot helps, you know, I'm explaining why I'm doing that. And if you frame it up with little things like why it works or explanation or something, it's not going to think that that's part of the output. So so those are our prompting guidelines. And before we get into, we have plenty of time here, so before we get into exercises, let's pause for a minute and open it up to a little bit of questions or discussion.
All right, so Chris, do you want to stop sharing your screen while
I will do so. Let's do it. Right.
So Kevin has a question. In that example where you ask for a summary of main topics covered from a meeting transcript, or, you know,
Whatever you want to put in. Yep.
What order for submitting the transcript? Do you do it before or after you make the request known? And like, what data formats can you use for that?
Such a great question. So you may have noticed a pattern, and you'll see this in the exercises, that not only will I provide the data that's being evaluated at the top, so to answer that part of your question, I put it at the top, but and the reason and just to address that, the reason it's at the top is because by the end, it makes more sense for us to use examples or some of the patterns we want it to follow and give it the instructions. And also, it allows us to reference those values in our instruction. So you'll notice in a lot of the examples, what I've done is you'll see where I'm doing like a bracket type thing, where I'll say, like, here's the, you know, bracket transcript, and then I use a closing bracket. While it's not specifically recognizing those as like HTML or something, it does know where it begins and ends. And so like, for example, I've started using the bracket one that you'll see in our exercises, because Claude 3 Opus is very responsive to that. Whereas like OpenAI's GPT models, they if you delimit with triple backticks, which is just like 3 quotes, and delimit the text that you wanted to evaluate, it's more responsive that way. So you know, there are different, each model has a different technique. You can find out some of their prompting guidelines to figure these things out. But in short, isolating it at the top allows you to reference it on the bottom, and then allows your the end of your prompt to be used for examples, for example. And what formats of data are currently acceptable. So whereas all the examples that we're talking about here today, we're going to show the text that's being evaluated right in the prompt, it's really a placeholder for either a text document, Word document, Excel file, pasted text, whatever it might be. And these models are getting more and more sophisticated to be able to interpret this source data with every new release. Excellent question.
Yeah, and another question is, can you use images in your examples?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a podcast with Matt Navarre called Claris Talk AI. Every 2 weeks, we talk about AI stuff. And one of the things we did was we had ChatGPT, not GPT 4.0, but ChatGPT 4 Turbo, take Matt's FileMaker proficiency exam. And the way that we did it is we actually took screenshots of the question with the available answers and we pasted them into our chat. Now you can do that through API calls too. You can actually send the reference link, a URL to an image for that to be evaluated. And not only does it like pull text from the image, but it also understands what the image is, and that can be used as the thing that you're evaluating. So I absolutely explore image inputs. There's some fascinating things that can be done, even in like a tool like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. They all kind of do image inputs as well.
That's interesting.
Oh, Taylor Erickson. I'm just gonna call that out. This is my good buddy Taylor Erickson. This is not rehearsed, but positive or negative experience when asking the GPT to help you create an ideal prompt. It's so interesting that you say that, Taylor. What I found is that I'll use one model to kind of audit or refactor a prompt that I've written myself for another model. So I'll write a model, and mostly because I've got like template formats down that I just sort of like fill in because you kind of use the same structure every time. But the interesting thing is sometimes you get redundant and you kind of lose the train of thought, and maybe your structure gets a little bit loose, or the sentence structure doesn't make sense. So I'll take my handwritten one that I want to send to to GPT-4, and I'll go to Claude and say, hey, this is a prompt for a language model. Can you get rid of any of the duplicate information and make sure it's not redundant and make it clear for a language model to consume as a prompt? And then I'll take that and then use it to speak to another one. So sometimes I play them off each other, but it's a great technique to leverage language models for your prompting.
It's really interesting. I know like 2 weeks ago, I like asked ChatGPT, how do I get an API key? And it pointed me to the right place.
Yeah, by the way, having it read and consume API documentation for you is one of the killer use cases for developers. I mean, API documentation was like anytime we would have a spec where we'd have a project where we'd have to connect to an API, all of our developers would groan. And now everyone just goes right to this, and like we could be in the pre-sales call and our sales team can go, oh yeah, it is possible to actually pull a transcript from Zoom or something because we see that right here. So great tool for that as well.
Oh,
super important question from Jerry, by the way. What is the best way to protect sensitive data? Don't send it to ChatGPT or Claude through chatbots. That's the first advice. And I absolutely am not intending to fearmonger there. All I mean by that is that the data that you send in ChatGPT could potentially be used as training data. What does that mean? Now, I'll reference that podcast again because I just did an episode last week called Our Language Models Databases, and I talk about this for about 40 minutes. And the answer is they're not databases. They do not store your sensitive data. You have absolutely no risk that the data you put into the model can then be retrieved by someone else. As a matter of fact, they're done learning and they're done retaining information the moment that they're published and released out into the wild. But they could be part of training. So that means that if you give sensitive data and then you ask a bunch of questions of it, those questions that you're asking of the specific data could be part of the learning process that future models go through. Either way, I think that's exposing your data. So the way that you actually do it is do API calls. API calls are not stored. Sam Altman himself went in front of Congress and raised his right hand and swore on the Bible or whatever they use at Congress and said, no, APIs are not used for training. And that has become a very important part of their team chat tool that they have, for example. And then also they have a lot of enterprise customers who have these same concerns. I would also point out that AWS and Microsoft Azure also have private link versions of all these models that are fully secured, and also that information does not become part of training. So I would suggest that you play around with some fake data, not your real data in ChatGPT, but when you get down to real stuff, even if you want to send like FileMaker data over, I promise you that there are tried and true compliant techniques that allow you to do that without the concerns that you may have about this being shared publicly. A good question on is ChatGPT HIPAA compliant, sort of consistent with what we've talked about. Tools and software can't necessarily be compliant so much as they might meet compliance requirements. Those could be things like single sign-on or logging information or protecting access. So I don't think that the tool itself falls into some of those categories, but I can promise you that in deployments that we're using, they have, like we have some patient data information that we're sending over, and we have gone through the full audits and created compliancy documents based on, from OpenAI statements and Microsoft and AWS, and they all fit within even the Grok LPU tool. We've found through our research that they meet the compliancies, but compliancy is really about the workflows you create as well too. So you have just as much responsibility as a developer there, but these tools, you can include these tools into those workflows.
Couple questions about kind of just managing prompts, and I think we'll take those and then maybe start the exercises.
Cool.
Like, how do you get how do you consistently produce structured output you want to use it somewhere else, like JSON, I think YAML, a couple other examples in the question.
These are all excellent questions, and you're thinking about this the right way. First, I will say that there's prompts and then there's prompt templates, and the prompt exercise that we're working on here is really just the instruction part of a prompt template. A prompt template can include things like a little section about constraints, for example. These are things that when you're doing testing of your chatbot or whatever it is that you're creating, you might find that, please don't use exclamation points or use flowery language or whatever. Like, that's where constraints go. The examples go into the prompt template on the bottom, like we've talked about. And then on the very end of these prompt templates, it's common to say output format. And this is where you can just in natural language say something like, and output your format in JSON, and you can even give it an example of the type of structure or just plain language structure. But the idea of outputting it in useful formats like a JSON object, which is great for us FileMaker folks because we can parse that out natively. So if we're making an API call and we get back the response as JSON, first of all, the response does come back as JSON. But if you're using a chatbot, you can ask it to format it as JSON, and that helps you give structure. The pro tip I'll give you on that is often we wrestle with consistency of output. So if we want to send a question to a chatbot like 100 times and we want the format to be specifically a certain way 100 times, we will ask for it in JSON because it does a really good job at formatting JSON objects consistently, but it might slide a little bit on just natural language. So JSON outputs is a really good use case for that. Sorry about the long answer. I know you wanted to get into exercises, but wanted to get that important point out.
Your long answer went to the other question that I wanted to ask. You talked about prompt templates.
Yes.
So question is, how do you manage them for speed? Do you use FileMaker to keep them organized and copy and paste? Do you use Text Expander?
All those are great tools. I was just at dinner with some Claris folks the other night, and someone mentioned that they created a FileMaker database to manage their prompt templates, and I thought that was brilliant because prompt templates ultimately are like a merge document anyways, and so you can insert certain information, or if you're just simply storing the filled in template for each project, that's an important part of it. So you'll find that you're going to need a library for these things. You'll also find that in deployments and business application deployments, you are going to want to have a database that manages all your prompt templates so that you can point to them and manage version control and have those be the structure for your prompts that are being sent out to the language model. So very important. And any of those examples are good on type expansion, and even FileMaker is a great tool for managing your prompts.
And there's one other question about what would, like, an example of how would you use prompts in client requests for product quality reviews. And I feel like there was a couple examples in the exercises on that.
That might be a good segue. I think we actually do have a couple of those in our examples. So why don't we dig in?
Let's dig in. So I am going to share my web browser.
Oh, here we go.
Actually, let me make sure my web browser is open and just showing the one tab I need it to share.
Good call. And you are using what chatbot?
I am going to be using just straight up ChatGPT because that was the easy one to get set up with.
Cool.
And I am, just so you know, I'm just sharing my web browser, but I have the exercise file open on the side to copy and paste so that you don't have to watch me type a lot.
And also, that's the same document that was part of the download in case folks want to do the same and play along. So yeah, let's do the first example. I'll tee up what the first example is. One of the impressive features of these chatbots are their ability to summarize text effectively, like really good at that. Like, for example, you may need to review and analyze large amounts of customer feedback or product reviews or market research data. So by leveraging or a transcript.
Claris Engage survey.
Yes, or our Claris Engage survey. Hey, thanks, Beverly, for the podcast plug. I really appreciate that in chat. But yeah, or the Claris Engage surveys. So in our example, what we're going to use is a fake transcript. It's truncated and small for the purposes of you being able to see it on screen. And let's take a look at what the structure of this. Yeah, go ahead and just hit enter to enter that in, and then scroll up to the top. So yeah.
There it is.
So we'll keep it. Yeah, we'll look at the answer in a second. So a couple things I want to point out here. So notice that the transcript, as humans, we can clearly see which part is the transcript and which is the prompt because I'm using like a tag style delimiter. Again, this is something that Claude accepts very well. And then like OpenAI likes triple backticks, but OpenAI's models will understand what we're doing here. So there's the transcript. We started at the top per the question before, and then the prompt, notice what we're doing here in the bottom. We say the prompt and then I reference the transcript again. So think of this as like a let function in FileMaker where we're declaring what the value of a variable is on the top of the function and then referencing that later in the function. It's the same type of principle that we're doing here. And you'll see this isn't required, but this is just sort of a pattern that I've found to be useful for folks. So you'll notice that what we're saying here is, hey, you model, your task is to generate a short summary of an internal meeting transcript for a project. And we give it the things that we want it to do. At one point I'll note out, see where it says use at most 50 words. Language models aren't that great at math. I don't mean that there's not a solution for that. There absolutely is a solution for how language models can leverage calculators, like Python tools, for example. But they won't get the 50 exactly, but they'll recognize the difference in length between when you ask for a 50 or a 300. So it's helpful to include those, but just don't expect exactly 50 words, for example. So let's take a look at what you got back. There it is. There is our summary. Sure, about 50 words. And it is mostly summarizing our transcript there. So that's a pretty easy one. And I'll let you know that if you're talking to iSolutions on a Zoom call, you are being recorded and you are automatically being sent into our meeting transcription system that gets fed over to the project manager to identify different tickets and updates and blockers and who's doing what. So this is a really great use of language models. I suggest that everybody use this for their daily drivers or even for some of your client projects as well too. How'd you feel about that one? That was easy, right?
Seems pretty straightforward, yes.
One other quick note I'll say as far as text length. So chatbots like GPT-4o have support for 128,000 tokens or more. And to kind of, what are tokens? Tokens are really like pieces of words. So to put it into words, that's roughly 100,000 words, roughly. So you can summarize entire articles, documents, meeting transcripts. I just summarized a 4-hour meeting transcript in like 3 seconds or something. And you can upload documents that are, short of 100,000 words and still be able to do this type of summary. So anyhow, how about if we wanted to, instead of summarize, we want to extract some information out of some text.
All right. So this one.
Oh, and by the way, a great note on chat about it would be great to have a cheat sheet. One of the items in the download is a cheat sheet of about 30 or so of these prompting principles with an example that are somewhat loosely based on our exercises here today too. So yeah, let's take a look at our second one.
Which is the action items.
And this again is another transcript. And here we're saying pull out the any kind of scope changes that we see, right? So here we go. This is what they discussed. And our prompt says, extract information about any changes in scope that are required for client approval and internal development. And we mentioned here that we're delimiting it with XML tags and limiting to 30 words, just a couple of pro tips there. So It's funny. So here it took the instruction of the XML tag, so we could take out the that instruction and we would just get the text back. But so it just says here, Mike, the project manager, reminded the team that the client has requested da 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 da. So it did pull the information that we were looking for here. So an interesting how it follows the formatting instruction as well.
Mhm.
Let's do one more of these summarizing things.
Okay.
And the next exercise is summarizing multiple Jira tickets for a project progress update. So let's say, this is a great way that you as a FileMaker development team can convey updates to your clients. So let's say you're using Jira or some other ticket manager. You can take a bunch of tickets. So let's feed it, I don't know, like 4 of the tickets. And then our prompt will say, our task is to, actually, let's do another conversation, by the way. This is important, and this may have had something to do with this transcript piece. When you decide to make a new conversation, you're essentially clearing the memory. So if we do care about some of the previous information that we added, and if that's going to be meaningful or even referenced in the prompts we're doing right now, we would keep this as a conversation. But in order to not confuse the chat bot, we'll create a new one. So the little icon just to the left of the ChatGPT icon in the
That
upper
one?
left-hand corner. Yeah. So just to linger on that for a second, that entire memory, all those other exercises that we did, get sent over with the new prompt. And that could be confusing. If we're spending all this time like trying to refine our prompt, that could be confusing to the last prompt that we're doing. So these happen to have a little bit of a through line through them, but they're really supposed to be separate ones. So deciding on when you create a new chat conversation, they're called, is super important. You want to do that intentionally when you want the information preceding it to be referenced later. Like, for example, I've had a conversation with a financial planner that's been going on for the last 2 months, and I have one Claude conversation, and I just keep opening it up every couple of weeks and asking a question of it or adding more information because I'm deliberately trying to reference that memory. So here in this case, we won't. So we created a new conversation, and we're going to feed it 4 tickets that are delimited by tags, and we're going to tell it, summarize a short narrative summary so we can send an email off to our customer and let's see what it gives us.
All right.
And here we said status update : and we told it to put the information, the summary of the tickets in there. So, you can see that it identified the status update : but probably not so much the tickets part. So that tells us to leave that out next time we do it as sort of a way to do your iterative prompting. So, hey, look, the project's progressing well, Rosemary.
All right. Look at that. I mean, I think the next exercise, I think, goes to the question we had earlier about inferring sentiment or product reviews, and so I think that's something we all need to do sometimes. So,
Amen. Let's do
so let's do 4, and then maybe we can.
Yeah. So let's do 4. So 4 is we're going to send it an email that we received from a customer. So we'll do a new conversation.
Okay.
And we'll say, in this case, let's try something so we can scroll down to the bottom of the prompt and let's remove. Oh no, this is good. That's good. That's good. That's good. There's nothing below that.
There's nothing below that.
Okay, good. That's what I was going to suggest. So what we're telling it here is we're sending it an email and we're saying, hey, language model, what was the sentiment? Positive, negative, or mixed? And we gave it the 3 options, so it didn't have to come up with its own sentiment. So it's going to choose from one of those 3, and we said give it as a single word. So we're expecting Matt. Oh, and then we got back the word negative. So this is telling us that the email was negative. And I mean, shoot, you could use this to prioritize which emails you should get back to first. For example, let me get to the negative ones first. And, it depends on how you're wired, good news first or bad news. So let's fast forward actually all the way down to, and there's a bunch of other exercises. We have like 10 or 12 of these in the materials if you're able to access them. Let's go to exercise 8.
Okay.
And we're going to do multiple steps. So this is a new conversation. And the really important part of this exercise is that it's not all about just asking one question or putting in one prompt and getting back one response. The magic of having all that memory in the conversation prior to the prompt you're putting in now means that you can refer to it. Look at this from a FileMaker perspective as when we ask questions of our FileMaker data, we're doing a find and we get back a found set. Sometimes that found set answers our question or it's everything we need. But sometimes we might use tools like expand or extend or constrain our found sets to sort of like move it in and out and really zero into exactly the thing we're looking for. If that concept makes sense in FileMaker, that's the same thing we can do inside our conversation. So let's do that. Let's start off with step number 1, which is just the review.
Okay.
And we're asking it to format the sentiment. So it's the same thing we did with the email, but a review. So let's go ahead and we'll just hit enter.
All right.
And it said positive. So now the second part, which is just going to be from where it says prompt all the way to the response colon. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, look, you're a customer service assistant and your task is to send an email reply. So given the review, which you can see is bracketed above. So this inside the conversational memory allows us to like refer to these as if they're variables that we've saved in memory. And then also the sentiment, which we've bracketed, we can refer to whatever that value is. So you'll notice if you paste in the prompt, look real close, see here it says, given the customer review by review and sentiment, we're actually telling it to go look previously in the conversation, whether it's on screen or not. It could have been, 20 prompts ago in the same conversation. It still has access to that. So let's see what it says. This one should be writing a review based on the sentiment. So let's see what we get back from our response. And then we say response. So we took out those tags. So now we see we get something nice and clean. So let's check this out. So particularly glad in this case, positive, right? So it's absolutely using the positive and it's absolutely citing specific things about the review that you saw earlier, and then kind of giving a nice, customer care response back. So in this case, we used 2 different steps. We determined what the sentiment was, put that into memory, and then referred to the sentiment in the original review and told it to do something completely different, and that was author an email. Let's do one last exercise where we're going to do this same thing. This is and we'll do a new conversation because we need new memory.
All right.
And this is what this process we're doing is referred to as iterative prompting. And it's really a crucial skill when working with large language models in either as chat or as multiple API calls. So let's do an example. All of these are going to be in a new conversation. So let's put in this new feature clip first.
Okay. So this, if you've got the file, is exercise 10.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. Exercise 10.
All right. And did I get all of it? I'm having copy and paste problems because my Mac is helpfully putting up Spotlight.
And this is kind of interesting because we're not even going to give it instruction. We're just going to give it some data, and it assumes it wants us to create a summary of that. So it went ahead and did it. I think it's kind of fun when you're playing with these chatbots to just like sometimes give it a document and just hit enter and see what it does. So in this case, it did. It gave us a nice kind of human readable new features thing, but it's a little too long. Right. So what we've decided is that this output's too long and we only have room in this thing that we're doing with, let's say it's a tweet or something, for about 50 words. So we're going to follow it up with the next step 2, Rosemary, which is a separate prompt that just simply says, generate a product description based on the provided new features, but use at most 50 words. And again, it won't, nail it on the 50 words, but you'll see that this is considerably shorter than the first one. So cool. This is probably something we could tweet out. But now let's take a look at it. And let's say we say, well, it's about the 50 words and it is more concise. However, it could be improved by focusing on, let's say, the most important aspects for our target audience. So let's revise our prompt and say, all right, try again or regenerate this, but this time focus on the software's efficiency and security benefits for workplace requirements and stick to the 50 words. So now let's see how it changes that product description. There we go. It's talking about the featuring the dashboards, the permissions. Then it gets into the design to optimize operations and protect sensitive data for small, medium-sized businesses. Perfect. Now let's do it one more time just to kind of check it out. Let's say that it focuses on efficiency and security, but we'd like it to focus on this specific user-friendly interface and customizable features to make it more relevant to our audience. So let's put that last prompt number 4.
All right.
And so it's got all the information in the whole memory. It's referring back to the last one we did. And and hey, perfect timing for us to be done with our exercises because you've just reached your limit. And And just so you know, all of this is free. You can play around with this, but if you have the free version, you're limited during certain time frames as to how much information you can put in there. And it worked out perfectly for us
All
here today.
right.
So
Yes. And so since I've been sharing, I haven't been seeing questions. So I'm going to pop chat back out and see um, what we had. All right. So there's a bunch of questions about getting the webinar materials. And just so everyone knows what I'll do, since they're kind of tied up in WebEx right now, I'll package those up as a zip file and put the download, link to the download in the announcement in community when I share the recording. So we will make those examples available through the recording in several different ways.
and we can also share the prompt training resources, which are some links in there you'll find, and maybe some of you are looking at it. There's OpenAI's prompt engineering guide, prompt engineering best practices from OpenAI. Also, this really great course from Deep Learning AI. They have a lot of really good courses, but the one on prompt engineering for developers is an excellent place to start, and you'll see some of these same techniques mentioned in there. And there's another good one for Vanderbilt University. And then finally, I actually created a GPT on ChatGPT of all the contents that we've been discussing. So you can go and try out your own prompts or ask questions that you might have asked in chat. And I think just yesterday or maybe today, you don't have to be a ChatGPT Plus user to get access to GPTs. So for free, you'll be able to go to the ChatGPT store and look for something that's called the Prompt Quick Start Guide with me as the author. And you'll have all the information we covered, all the exercises, and actually it will guide you through prompting, and you can tell it different prompts that you want to create or different goals, and it will actually craft those prompts based on the techniques and exercises that we've discussed here. So that's one of the links in the prompt training resources. And then finally, as was asked, a prompt cheat sheet. I think there's about 30 or so prompt cheat sheet guides and an example column with some of the exercise specific content in there as well too. So make sure that people check that out as well.
Yes. Well, thank you, Chris. I don't see a whole lot of questions. Oh, now there's some coming in.
Oh, good. And Angie's posted the link as well
The
too.
link to my session with Wim in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Kevin has a question. It was helpful to hear why and when to start a new chat, but does ChatGPT continue to use any prior communications from the same user, assuming you're signed in when you're using it?
ChatGPT specifically has a feature which I don't know if it's for just plus users or free users, but it's called memory, and it on its own it decides which elements it's going to save to memory. If you look in the on the bottom left hand corner where your account information is, you can see the memory option there. And I have memory off all the time, and that's because I use ChatGPT for so many different things. But like for example, my wife is a special ed teacher, so she'll often use ChatGPT for one thing, lesson planning and lesson ideas. So it's really useful for her to save the memory because that it might know things about her, like, you know, what grades she teaches and what topics she's responsible for. And that therefore she wouldn't have to mention those in the new memory. But when you're developing, you can choose which part of memories or maybe even memory from previous conversations that you're sending along to these language models. So that could be a really interesting way to introduce some sophisticated memory management into your prompting techniques when you're embedding all these in FileMaker.
All right. One couple last questions as the poll finishes. Do you have any specific resources for people trying to implement OpenAI in FileMaker with an API to help you go beyond the basics? So for example, including a PDF from a container field rather than just text in your API request.
Yeah, I think I would say hang tight. There'll be a lot of resources available soon, as I think the best way to put it. But I think in general, to refer to how you send documents through API calls, you actually put a document or an image or something somewhere, refer to that link, and then the link goes and gets the contents of the document or the image or whatever for evaluation over on the language model interpretation side. So in general, that's how you'll do those things. But I would say hang tight. There may be a lot of information coming on that front.
All right. I think there's like one last question. And this is something I'm curious about too. And that is, have you spent any time using local LLMs with a tool like Olama for your
Yes.
FileMaker solutions?
Yeah, so in general, an open source language model means that that's a language model that can run locally. If you have the compute on your server to manage it, you'd be surprised how little compute some of the smaller models require. But you can run open source models behind your wall, which means that all the communication between whatever your application like FileMaker might be and the language model itself is all managed behind the wall. Again, you can get the same type of privacy and security using private links with some of these other cloud-based services, but the open source idea is very common and prevalent throughout the AI community. So yes, absolutely. We, as a matter of fact, most of our applications have model switchers on the back where we can switch between any number of different models, and we always have just as many open source models included on the back end as we do cloud ones. And so, they're not all the same. You can go on to like Hugging Face, which is a website that has these leaderboards. You can just search for Hugging Face leaderboard for open source language models, and you can see all the different benchmarks of evaluation to determine what the right one might be for you. Also pay attention to the compute that's required though, because you get into some of these larger parameter models, like you'll see things called like 7B or 7dB. The 7dBs like really do require some like pretty significant server level architecture, at least for now. Or you can even look under LPUs, which are some sources out there that will run open source models on their structure that make them really snappy and effective. So absolutely, open source models should be part of your discovery process, no doubt.
All right. And one last question. Can you drop the link to your podcast with Matt in the chat if you have it handy? Because people have asked for that.
Oh, as a matter of fact, Angie kindly mentioned that that content, those podcasts can be found on Claris Academy. So I think the easiest way to find it, because I would like to drive people to Claris Academy for these resources. If you go to Claris Academy and look under the AI section, I hope I'm mentioning that correctly, you'll be able to find embedded YouTube versions of the podcast with linkage over to the episodes themselves. And shameless plug, but we've covered everything from prompt templates to context to vector databases to even the most recent one I alluded to, which is language models being databases or not. So they're really meant to be instructor type discussions about some of these important principles about interacting with AI. So I hope you guys find those useful, and I hope you found today useful as well.
All right. Well, it looks like people did. I'm seeing lots of good thank yous. It's been great. Appreciate the information and the discussion in the chat. So with that, thank you, Chris, for doing this. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everyone.